Hello everyone. Today we will be working with particles. We actually have kind of talked about particles without talking about them a few times. Up until now we've gone over the wa, no, ga, and ka particles. But today we're going to focus just on particles, what they do, how they work, and then focus on a few of the more common ones. And actually, this lesson and the next two lessons after this will be all particles. So let's really focus in on them. Do keep in mind that even though I'm talking, you are free to jump in at any point. If you have a question, you can just type it into the channel and I or someone else will answer it for you. Okay, so first, before we look at some examples, some specific stuff, I want to talk about what particles are. It's something that sometimes, I'm not sure what level you all are at, but for some people, even months and months later into their Japanese studies, maybe even a year later, particles still have some kind of, you know, fog around them where you're not quite sure what they do or how they translate. And hopefully that gets a little clearer today. The first thing I want you to know is that, and some of you have heard me say this before, as learners of another language, the L2, that second language we're trying to learn, our first inclination is to do direct translation. This isn't a bad thing. This is something that happens inside your head, that if you want to say something in Japanese or whatever it is, you first think of it in your own language. That's probably English for most of you. And then you translate it over into Japanese, then you say it or you write it. The same thing happens in the other direction. When you are, absorbing Japanese, if it's written Japanese, you want to understand all of it. No one really wants to get half of something, they want to understand all of it. And so when you see all these words in a Japanese sentence, even a short sentence, you want to be able to assign meaning to each of those. You want to say this word means this, that word means that, and with that translation, you gain an understanding of the sentence. And that's where particles jump in and say, sorry, that's not how it works. And so the first thing I want you to understand is that most of the time, not always, but most of the time, particles don't have a meaning themselves, and that they aren't in the sentence, and you can point at that particle and say, this means this word in English, or this means these words. It happens sometimes, but often that's not the case. Rather, what they do, and this is what Renshu is mentioning on the page in front of us, is that they have jobs. They have jobs, and basically they take the other words in the sentence and tell us why those words are there. And some of you have might recall what I called these before. What did I call a particle when we talked about the wa particle? The very first one. Does anyone remember what I called it? I referred to it as something that you might see in front of a building if you walk up to a building. Does anyone remember? Now, this was a number of lessons back, but just in case. No one? Okay. So I referred to them as signposts. And I used the entrance sign as an example, in that an entrance sign, that points to the entrance of a building, might not be part of the building itself. In our example, the building is the sentence, but it's pointing to the building saying, hey, that door over there, it's not the supply entrance, it's not the back door, that door is the entrance. They're signposts that point to the other words in the sentence and tell us why they're there. They're usually one character. Most of the ones we'll cover over the next few weeks are one character. There are some that are longer, but most of them are simple. And why we need these is because Japanese, and this can be frustrating initially, Japanese is a language where the order is not as important. The word order. It's not that you can put anything wherever you want. There's a general order where these things kind of come towards the front, these things kind of go towards the back. But with most of them, there's a bit of flexibility. Like you can switch these two words around, or this word can go at the beginning or it can go in the middle of the sentence. And so when we look at English and we see something like the mouse eats the cheese, that sentence has a completely different meaning than if the cheese somehow gains sentience and we said the cheese eats the mouse. Japanese, however, has a bit more flexibility with it. And because of that, we need those particles to help point things out and say, hey, this word, this is the job that it's doing. And, the verb always comes at the end. And then each noun typically has a particle attached to it saying, hey, this is what's going on. And although we haven't talked about the O particle, we're going to in just a second. This sentence, if you look at it up above, I'm going to read it out for you. Nezumi wa chizu o tabemasu. The mouse eats the cheese. Simple enough. But again, with the English, we knew it's the mouse eating the cheese and not the other way around because of the ordering. Here, we see that wa particle marking the topic or the subject sometimes, and then the O particle marking the chizu to let us know, hey, this is what the mouse is doing in this sentence. This is what the cheese is doing or having done to it. So just remember, they are signposts. The wa doesn't mean anything by itself. You can't look at the wa and say, oh, it means banana. It doesn't mean banana or anything else. It's a signpost, and always remember, particles point to the left. So they always come after the thing that they're talking about. So here, the wa is pointing to the nezumi on the left. The o here is pointing to the chizu on the left. So with that in mind, that's kind of just a rough framework. Let's actually look at some particles and see, how we work through these. The first one is the one that I feel is the hardest to draw of all the characters in hiragana. It still plagues me, and I've been writing Japanese for 20 years. It's the O. And the first thing I want you to know is that a lot of you might not be writing characters ever, but you'll probably be typing them. In fact, I hope you all try typing some, later today in this lesson. And so, does anyone know how you type this character, O? If you're typing on the keyboard and you're using Romaji, so you're using your ABCs to type it out, how do you type out O? Yes, it is wo, and it actually is pronounced wo sometimes. It's something where you hear pronounced wo, for example, in a song from time to time. But 99.999% of the time, you will pronounce it as O. That means if you try and type it the way you say it, it's going to look like this. Just typing out an O will look like the O, as in the a, I, U, E, O, O. So whenever you're typing, you're going to type the wo to get our crazy little 3-stroke character out there. And O's are used to mark the object. Now, some of you might be thinking, wait, I don't remember what objects are. I didn't like English when I was a student. I don't want to study English now. So real quickly, objects are what the verb, the action, is affecting. If you eat cheese, what's getting affected by the eating? The cheese is. If you throw a ball, the ball is receiving the action. If you sing a song, the song is receiving the action of the singing. And so the direct object is marked with the O. So let's look at some really simple sentences. These are only 3 words if you count a particle as a word. And let's take a look at these words just in case you don't know what these are. We talked about the verb conjugation a little bit last time, but here from the left, top to bottom, we have mizu, which is water, sakana, which is fish, and basu, which is bus. On the right side, we have nomimasu, which is the present polite form of to drink. We have tabemasu, which is to eat, and machimasu, which is to wait. So all of these actions, in a sense, affect something. And if you're drinking, what do you drink? You drink water. So here we see, someone, there's no subject here. So someone is drinking water. The second one, eating is being done. That's the action, eating. What are they eating? They're not eating water. They're not eating a bus. They're eating fish. And in the third sentence, someone is waiting, or waits rather. Someone waits on a bus or waits for a bus. And even right here, you can start to hear that. Listen to me translate the three sentences. I'll do one at a time. Mizu o nomimasu. I'm going to assume, because there's no subject, I'm going to assume it's me talking about myself. I drink water. If you can hear, the O is not getting replaced by anything in the English. There's no word in the English that you can point to and say, hey, that's what O is becoming. Sakana o tabemasu. I eat fish. Again, the O disappears in the English. It just doesn't exist. Now listen to the third one. Basu o machimasu. I wait on a bus, or I wait for a bus. All of a sudden, we have these extra words. In this third sentence, we have, what do we hear? You can hear on, on a bus, as I'm waiting on a bus. You can also hear for a bus. I'm waiting for a bus. So there are times when, the character, if you want to think of it this way, does get translated, but I wouldn't recommend that, because if you tell someone, if someone says, so what does O mean? And you say, well, sometimes it means on or for. That's not really correct. That just happens to be the way that we talk about the object when we deal with the word wait. So O doesn't mean on, O doesn't mean for. O points out the object of the sentence. And again, it's frustrating. Like, you want to assign a word to it. So if you have the sentences next to each other, you can draw lines between them and say, oh, here's sakana. Okay, it goes to fish. And here's eat. Okay, that goes to tabemasu. But you can't. That's the way it is. Now, we don't know, if we've talked about this a bit before, but Japanese is a fan of not saying things if they don't have to say it. And so in these sentences, there's no subject, there's no topic. We don't know who is saying it. So in this case, if you don't know, it's probably the speaker talking about themselves. But if you feel more comfortable, or if you need to clarify, you can add that subject. And we're using the wa marker to add the subject, or technically the topic. So if you want to say, I drink water, watashi wa mizu o nomimasu. If we're talking about a lucky cat that found some fish, neko wa sakana o tabemasu. Or if we have our Renshu mascot, Kao-chan, that Kao-chan is waiting on a bus, I'm not sure why, then you would say, Kao wa basu o machimasu. So let's practice this a little bit. We've got the O, and there really isn't much more to the O particle. In and of itself, it's fairly simple. But let's practice. And when I say let's, I don't mean, hey, everyone, you're practicing. It's if you want to, we'd love to have you try some simple sentences. And let's use the same words. Let's use the same verbs, and we'll keep it simple. And again, let's not do negative tense. Let's not do past tense. Let's leave kanji out of it. Let's keep it simple, hiragana. And the mas form can refer to now, or it can refer to sometime in the future. So let's talk about what is something that you will eat later today. What's something that you'll eat later today? And for example, I hope this is true. I'm not sure if it is, but kare o tabemasu. I will eat curry, or I eat curry, depending on the context. But what about you? What is something that you think, and if you don't know what you're going to eat, make it up. If you want to, I love crazy sentences. So if you want to say, "Tsuki o tabemasu," yeah, that moon up there, I'm eating it because it's made of cheese. Go for it. Say you're going to eat the moon. That's fine. If you are like me and you bought too many Pokemon cards and now you don't have any money, so you need to eat the Pokemon cards instead of food, say, "Pokemon card o tabemasu." That's fine. I won't judge. But give it a try. And if you're not familiar with how we do this, you can see people typing them into the channel. Don't worry about making a mistake. Mistakes are actually the best way to remember something, is to screw up on it. And if you don't have Japanese installed on your computer, do this. Type it out in Romaji. We're not going to judge. You practicing is the best possible thing you can do right now. So any form that you need to take in order to practice, go for it. But since this is a beginner lesson, if you put kanji in, please throw the hiragana in just under it. And that way we can see, some of us that can't read it, we can see, oh, that's what that is. So I'm going to read a few. I'm going to scroll back up. Someone said they are going to eat meat. Someone's going to eat bread. Here we've got grapes. Ramen. Ramen, interestingly, is not spelled that way. It's strange, but ramen has a long dash in it. And if you have trouble remembering that, what's that dash for? It's the noodle. Think of it that way. It needs a dash because ramen's long noodles, right? So in English, we say ramen. Because if you said ramen, it would sound like your brain just froze and you just kept saying the same thing too long. But in Japanese, it's ramen. And I just made that mnemonic up, but I don't want to take credit for that because another wonderful user on Renshu, they were describing the word seta, which is sweater. And one of the hardest things for us native speakers, English native speakers, is where do those vowels get extended? And they said seta, you can remember it because you have two arms, two long sleeve arms on your sweater. And that's why you need the two dashes, one dash for each arm. So if you're ever coming up on a word that's got those dashes on it, a katakana word, try and visualize the word and say, oh, it's got that dash because of the noodles or because of the long sleeves or whatever it is. And hopefully that'll help you. Okay, so I'm jumping back. Shoyu's going through rough times and eating grass. Someone's having pizza. Yum, yum. And then Kaori is eating a star. Great. So all your sentences were awesome. And I noticed that nobody put watashi wa. And that's perfectly okay. Because it's clear, if you're typing, you're talking about yourself. That can be assumed. And so that's not casual Japanese. It's not I'm dropping it out because I'm speaking casually. It's you're dropping it out because you don't need it. And that's perfect. So I want to practice with the drinking as well. Or actually, I'm going to do a different verb. But before that, let's switch it over to questions. So if you want to say, what are you going to eat? Or what are you going to drink? Or what are you going to buy? Then you just take the thing, that we were talking about before, the pizza or the sweater or the star, and you replace it with nani. Now, in Japanese, there's actually two words that mean what, which makes you say what? Like why? Why are there two? And it can be a bit tricky remembering, when you use each one. But if you're using that o, you're marking the object is always going to be nani. And the way I think of it is try saying this quietly to yourself. Say nani o. Say quietly to yourself, nani o. Now try switching it out for the nan. Nan o. Nan o. It's harder to say the n and the nan and then stop long enough to get that n sound out and then give it a break and then add the o. Because if you push it too close together, it sounds like nan no. So you have to say na, no, and that's a pain. So let's just say nani o. Because that just flows, it flies off the tongue so easily. Nani o, nani o. Anyway, this is all you have to do for questions, is add that ka in at the end that we were talking about and replace it with a nani. So I'm going to ask you a few questions. Let's practice this. And if you'd like to answer, please do so. And ignore Muta, who is trolling us. That I guess you could say naan if you're speaking of the lovely Indian bread, which is so good. But let's put that bread aside and focus on this. I'm going to ask you a question and answer in the same way that we did before. Put that object, o, and then the verb. And since it's the holiday time, Christmas for a lot of people, not everyone, it's a time where people buy more than they usually do. For yourself, like Pokemon cards, or for someone else. And so let's say, nani o kaemasu ka? What will you buy? Or what are you going to buy? Oh, Fuoki got the answer that covers everything. Presento o kaemasu. And Fuoki, if you need my address to send those presents to me, just let me know after the event. I'll tell you. I'm no longer in a city small enough that you can say Michael in that city and it'll reach me. But apparently I'm still rare enough of a name that I've had people send me not complete addresses, where they cut off the last two numbers of my address and still reach me because I think they say, oh, Michael, it's just one Michael in that neighborhood. So what about other people? What are you going to buy? And if you are thinking, I want to say this, but I don't know that word, ask us. We would love to, help you learn a new word and say, oh, this means this. What are you going to buy? What will you buy? So as I said, someone's buying a present. Mal is buying a game. Awesome. Nibutsu is going to buy some tea. Shoyu is going to try to buy Kaochan. I wish you luck. That reminds me, one of these days, I really want to try and get the Kaochan plushie made. But that requires me looking into a maker, and I don't have time for that. One day, the world will have a Kaochan plushie. Stefu has a broader range of things. Stefu's buying something that's cute. And Kaori, don't forget, when you write that O, write it with the W-O to make sure you get the right hiragana that comes out. It's pronounced the same way, but you want the wo. As in, whoa, why do I need to write it this way? And if any of the little ways to remind you things you hear and they make you groan, then awesome. That's perfect. Things that make you feel, ugh, that's so silly. Those are the things that stick. Okay. And let's do. No, let's stop it. And we're going to jump on to the next particle. Again, you can ask questions whenever you want. But since we're switching topics, if anyone has a question about this O, feel free to drop it in now. All right. Looks like we don't have any questions. If you have one that pops up later and you're thinking, oh, they already finished, oh, I can't ask that, ask. we're happy to help you out. Okay, let's jump in the next one. The next is de. And there's another particle that gets confused a lot with de. We're not going to talk about that one today. We'll jump into that next week. And so let's isolate them. They both talk about location. We'll talk about one today, one next time, and we'll compare them next time as well. So de is used for, as I said, it's for the location. And specifically, it's talking about where an action takes place. Where an action takes place. And I guess this is good news. De is one of the ones that does usually have an English counterpart. Now, there's often different words that come up, but there's usually, if you drew a line, there's usually a line that goes from de to one of the other words. Because since we're talking about locations, in English, we often say, at the park, in my room, on the table, and there's different prepositions that we use. And all of those kind of get clumped together and they're used as de whenever we're talking about a location. And again, let me emphasize that the locations are used for actions. Now, we just had 3 actions a minute ago. We had drinking, eating, waiting. And so these are all actions. These are all things that you do. And so when I say action, it's a doing verb. And you'll see why we make that distinction when we jump into next week's lesson. But for now, it's something that you do, something that you choose to do. And so we have nomimasu, we have tabemasu, and we have machimasu. And so where are these actions taking place? That's where de comes in. Now, real fast, this first word might be new to some of you. Uchi. Does anyone know what uchi means? Does anyone know what uchi means? 2 answers. Yes, some of you have probably learned it one way, some of you have learned it the other way. When I say other way, it's not that there's a different way. It's actually that there's 2 words. And so, okay. So let me clarify this word. What's the word that everyone learns first when they learn the word for house? When someone says this is house, yes, it's ie. Now, ie refers to any house. It can refer to your house. It can refer to someone else's house. It can refer to a house that you see down the street. ie is kind of your broad, general purpose word. Uchi, however, notice the second definition that's popping up. This is actually, I would say, the more common one. Uchi is usually used to refer to your own house. And what do we call our own house? Home. So uchi often gets translated at home or my house. And so it's most often used when you're referring to your own house, where ie is more about, oh, look at that house over there. It's filled with Pokemon cards. Let's go break in and take those. I didn't say that. Uchi is more about your house. So if you're drinking, someone else said they were buying tea. If you buy that tea and you're going to drink it at your house, you would say uchi de nomimasu. If again, now, most of you know that we're a fan of cats over here at Renshu. You can see the loading screen whenever Renshu opens to know that. There's always a cat in there next to Kalchan. And I'd like to think that there's a future where a cat can go into a restaurant and order a fish. And so, where are they having that fish? Restaurant de tabemasu. And then, third sentence. That's a good question, Fuzorito. I'll get to it in just a sec. Waiting, it's like, where are you waiting? You might wait at the bus stop, you might wait on the street, and you have, that's the number 2 definition here. It's where you're waiting. So the day marks where the action is taking place. And Shoyu is correct. It is Uchi. Well, of course it's Uchi because you're asking for Uchi, but Uchi is that Uchi. Ochi is usually, yeah, you use the more polite form when you're talking about other people's houses sometimes. And then Uchi is more for your house. That's a very good question. So yeah, here's another mnemonic for you. The Uchi that we're talking about, it works really well for that kanji because what does that kanji look like? If you know the kanji for people, there it is. And what's that person doing? Well, their head is stabbed through the top of the house, but let's just ignore that for a second. And you can see a person inside the house. It's your house that you're inside. And maybe you were jumping too hard and your head just, comedy movie style, your head just popped in through the top and you're sticking out the roof. So, before we continue, let's practice a little bit more. Let's practice using day. And we haven't done, we did tabemasu, but let me ask you I'm going to ask you in English because we haven't learned this all the way in Japanese, but what is your favorite place, or excuse me, where is your favorite place to eat? If you could choose, where do you like to eat? And so you might say, well, I love picnics. So I koen de tabemasu. I eat at the park. Or I forget who it was, Kaori, I think, that's into eating stars. And so what better place to eat stars than the moon? Tsuki de tabemasu. So where do you like to eat? You don't need to tell us what you're eating. Let's keep them simple. You can keep it 3 words. That's all you need. Place, de, and then tabemasu, our verb. So Fuoki, they use kanji, but they said jibun no heya. So in their own room, like in my room, is where they like to eat. Adi must be a fan of sushi because they like eating at the sushi restaurant. Rumi is eating at home. Anyone else? Anyone else want to take a crack at it? And again, I have mentioned this before, but if someone else puts your sentence and it's like, oh, they use my sentence, if I say it, it will sound like I'm copying them. That's not true. If you see a sentence that you like, you should take the time to type that sentence out again. It'll help it stick inside your head. Okay, as people are finishing up their answers, I'm going to continue. Now, remember earlier where I said the ordering of the words isn't as important in Japanese? Here's an example. Now, this might feel like a jump because we went from 3-word sentences to all of a sudden a lot more. But look at what we have now. We are now taking the 2 particles that we learned and we're dropping them in together. So if you're drinking water at home, uchi de mizu o nomimasu. Now look at the second sentence. The second sentence has basically the same meat of the first sentence. You've got a location, you're consuming something, and it's what you're consuming, drinking or eating. But the second one says, sakana o restaurant de tabemasu. So you might think, well, wait, the first one has de, the location first, and then the object next. The second one, object first, location next. Which one's better? And the answer is neither is better. They're both completely acceptable. They're both completely natural. If you had to say what's different about the 2 of them, the one that comes earlier tends to have a bit more stress on it. I don't mean spoken stress, but I mean importance in the sentence. But it's not so much that if you were to say one and say, oh, I should have reversed those 2, my sentence is ruined. It's not that. This is a very slight level of stress placed on one over the other. And later on, when we get into questions, more questions, you'll see why you might put one in front of the other. So for example, that first sentence, it says, uchi de mizu o nomimasu. I drink water at home. Why is uchi de coming first? Maybe the other person asked you, where do you drink water? Because that's a question that people ask all the time. And if they said, where do you drink water? Your answer is probably going to have the location, the where, first, because that's what they're asking about. The second sentence, I eat fish at the restaurant. Maybe someone says, oh, you're going to a restaurant? What will you eat? And then you'll say, well, they're asking me what? I'm going to put the answer first. Sakana o restaurant de tabemasu. So if you're just putting them out yourself, it doesn't really matter which one you're using. If someone's asking you a question, you usually put the answer first. You put the answer earlier in on the sentence. Now, last one. You can see it's even a bit longer. If you need a subject or a topic, you're not talking about yourself eating or drinking or waiting, about Kao-chan doing something, you can put that kao wa at the beginning. And now the sentences are getting longer and longer all of a sudden. We went from 3 words, now we have 7. If we tossed in just a couple of adjectives that we've learned, we might have an 8, 9, or 10 word sentence. And this is the point where you might start to think, oh, I have no idea what's going on. This happens to Japanese people too. And I know this because my son is 6 years old. He's I like to call them bilingual, my kids, but he's in a Japanese school. And so I get to see how do Japanese kids learn their own language. I see his textbook, I see the kids' books that he brings home. And what's really interesting is in order to both help them have a good cadence when they're speaking, as well as to help them understand the construct of the sentence, often in children's books, they will put for example, this last sentence. I'm going to type it one more time in the channel so you can see what I'm saying. Give me one sec. If you look at the Discord, you'll see this is how they write it in children's books a lot. Because the particle hooks on to the thing before it, they'll write it like this. They'll do word, particle, and then they'll put a space. and then word, particle, space, verb at the end. 顔は街でバスを待ちます。So you could probably hear me putting a little bit extra space in between each clump. And so this isn't a, oh, well, we're just silly foreigners. We don't know the language, so we need to do this. This is actually what they do. And so that's a way you can think of it. When you see a long sentence, and you're trying to break it down, you're looking for those pairs, those word particle pairs, or noun rather, noun particle pairs. And say, okay, there's the topic, Kyle's the topic. Kyle's at the street, at the road, doing something to a bus. Are they eating a bus? I'm not sure. Oh, no, they're not eating a bus. They're waiting for a bus. And that's how you can start to break down these sentences. Now, just like before, if you're asking a question, before we had the nani o, what do you drink, or what do you eat rather? Here, fuzorito matemasu is if it's an action you're in the middle of doing right now. And the full polite version is matte imasu. Your version is kind of halfway between polite and casual. No, it's not. It's a little closer to polite. But that would be I am waiting. Machimasu is like I wait, or I will wait. But someone calls you and they say, so what are you doing? And you say, I'm waiting on a bus. You'd use mattemasu or mattemasu. Good question. Back to the sentence. If you're asking about, where, just like before, instead of nani o, you say doko de. Instead of nani o, doko de. So let me ask you one question before we move on to our last particle. And I'm going to give you just a minute because we're kind of running short on time. Let's use the doko, which is where. Doko de yasumimasu ka? Yasumu can mean to be absent from, but it also more commonly means to rest, right? To take a break. So when you take a break, where do you take a break? Where do you rest? You're like, oh, I need a break from whatever it is you're doing. Where do you go? So Danny Danny rests outside. Show you very specifically waits next to their dog. Or not waits, I'm not sure why that's stuck in my head. Rests next to their dog. So they say, hey dog, get over here. Let's relax. Let's watch TV. Doesn't matter where they're watching TV as long as the dog is next to them. We've got a couple of people that, oh no, one says uchi, one rests at home, the other one rests at the umi. Quick question about umi. What does umi mean? The first two answers, yeah, it can mean the beach or the sea. So when Nibutsu said umi de yasumimasu, they probably aren't referring to like going out into the ocean and then just chilling there. They're probably referring to the beach. It's contextual. There is a word, kaigan, which refers specifically to the beach. However, if you talk to someone in Japanese and you say, hey, let's go to the beach today, you don't say, let's go to the kaigan. You say, let's go to the umi. And context will let you know if they're talking about the beach that's right in front of the ocean or the ocean itself. Okay, we've got about 12 more minutes, so let's jump into the last section. ni. Now, ni can also be used to talk about location, but we're not dealing with that one today. We're going to talk about time. And, of course, time is something that is always popping up in sentences. Now, there's something very important with time that we need to talk about. First off, let me give you an example of these three that are on here. Now, we haven't done really a lesson on specific counters being the way that you count things, whether it's hours or months or days or whatever. But on this page, and you can see the English below, ichiji means 1 o'clock. Gogatsu, go, 5. It's the 5th month, May. And then doyobi is Saturday. Whenever you're marking concrete time phrases, like these, you use ni to tell us when this thing happened. And in English, you might say at 1 o'clock. You might say in May, or you might say on Saturday. So the ni, it can look like different things in the English depending on what you're using. Now, what does concrete mean? This is the thing that trips people up a lot. Because there's concrete, or you could also say absolute time, and then there's relative time. And this is how I'm going to do it. Someone else described it this way to me, and it was so good that I stole it, and I've been using it ever since then. The concrete time that we're talking about, I'm going to type it out. Concrete time is a time that you can point to on a calendar or on a clock. So if you're looking at a clock, for example, you can point to 1 o'clock. You can point to 12:30. You can point to 6:15. On a calendar, you can point at days. You can point at weeks. You can point at a month. You can point at the Saturday. Contextually, it's probably this week, but like this week on Saturday. If it's something you can point to, and it's just that one spot, like if I say 1 o'clock on a clock, there's only one spot on the clock. If I refer to May, there's only one May. If I refer to doyobi, Saturday, but contextually I mean this Saturday, there's only one this Saturday. And it might be, for me, it's going to be December 17th. All of these can use ni. All of these can use ni. To contrast that, our relative time phrase is like kyo. Like, what is today? Today changes every day. So if you look at a calendar, can you point to today? And then tomorrow, will it still be the same today? No. It's relative to where you are now. Raishu, next week, again, there's a different Raishu every week. It keeps changing. So you can't circle Raishu on the calendar and then next week say, oh yeah, look at Raishu. That doesn't work. Same with last month or next month. So these relative phrases, in 20 minutes, tomorrow, yesterday, 5 years ago, next year, you cannot use ni with those. It's only for these concrete ones that refer to a specific point in time. Now, this is something you'll just pick up in practice, and we'll have some examples later on, not today, on how you use those relative time ones. So let's look at some examples. If you're talking about sleeping and you go to sleep at 10, like I try to, because I have to wake up early for my kids, you might say, 10時に寝ます. I go to sleep at 10. Or if you're in Japan and you're following along with Japanese traditions, it's very common, especially on New Year's, but in January, to eat mochi, which is made out of rice. And so you might say, 1月に mochi o tabemasu. In January, I eat mochi. Or if you're trying to get really long and show off all these things you just learned in one sentence, you could say, Watashi wa kinyoubi ni tegami o kakimasu. I'm reading it, in order. I will write a letter on Friday. Or probably more naturally, on Friday, I will write a letter. So we're going to use these ni markers to tell us when something is happening. And it's worth noting that because, before we said, what do you put first, what do you put second, and the more important thing tends to come first, typically time is pretty important. Like if you're taking the time, if you're taking the time to talk about time, you're mentioning it because it's important, And so time usually comes at the beginning or near the beginning. What it says here on Renshu is it comes, at the very beginning of the sentence or just after the subject. So to wrap up today's lesson, let me ask you a few questions about time. Okay? So, we did nanio for saying like, what do you eat? What do you drink? What do you buy? We said doko de for, where do you do something? And if we're talking about time, and specifically we're going to talk about time on a clock, you use nanji. Ji is the thing for hours. And if you don't know the times yet, if you don't know those hours, you can just say, for the sake of studying today, you can just type something out like that. That's fine. I mean, that actually does happen. But I'm going to ask you a couple of things about when you do things. So let's keep it simple. When do you go to sleep? Typically. Nanji ni nemasu ka? Nanji ni nemasu ka? This is your last chance to practice today, so definitely give it a shot. Just replace that first word with the time. Use the Japanese if you know it. Just use the numbers if you don't. And then don't forget to drop that ka, because we're no longer asking a question, we're answering it. So, nanji ni nemasu ka? And then if you want to play a game, think in your head about how old or young the person is that's answering based on what time they say they go to sleep. Also, if you want to mix and match Japanese, you can do things like this. That's fuoki, not fuoki, emiru, put 12 o'clock, juniji, they use kanji, but you can use the numbers 1, 2, and then ji to say juniji. That works as well. So we have people going to sleep at all different times of night and day. And with the last 2 minutes, let me ask one more thing. Let's flip it around, talk about when you wake up. Nanji ni okimasu ka? So it looks like we have people that don't believe in the normal sleep schedule. People are waking up and going to sleep at all kinds of crazy times. I applaud you for it. Chances are a time will come in your life where your body no longer lets you do that. Okay. So that wraps up today's lesson. And again, this is being recorded. And so this lesson will be available here inside of our Discord, on our YouTube channel, as well as on inside of Renshu, the app. It's available to some people now, but it will soon be visible to all people. So thank you again so much. Next week I'll go ahead and show you what we're going to be doing next week. Next week we are jumping into the E and Ni particles. We got 2 more sets of particles. E and Ni will be next week. So I hope you join us. Thank you so much.